So I'm Brian Recker, and I'm a public theologian and author. I am a former pastor, and so I often speak about my deconstruction and leaving more high control, fear-based religion and discovering a more inclusive spirituality. And in that process, it's hard to speak about that without also confronting the patriarchy in ways that, especially religion is often used to platform men, silence women. And although this hurts women, I have lately been talking a lot about the way that this also hurts men. I don't think that that needs to be centered by any means, but I think part of the reason that you're talking to me is that I have three sons, and I also talk about the way that many of these ideas, which are common in high control religion, are also pervasive in society, although possibly less pronounced in certain ways. And I can see those things influencing my sons and other men, and I can see them shaping the way that I was raised, and I'm still trying to deprogram myself of a lot of that as well.
How did you start to come to understand patriarchy's role in religion and your own programming? Like, when was the first time you were like, oh, this sucks?
So growing up in the patriarchy, it always was uncomfortable to me, but I didn't recognize that that was a system. I thought it was just reality, the way things were, and I never fit cleanly into it. And I always thought that was a problem in myself. So I often felt like I was battling against my own nature in the sense that. I mean, even as a heterosexual white man, and in many ways, the system of the patriarchy was built for people like me. I had to cut off parts of myself to belong in that. And I was always, for example, in college, I don't know if you remember this term, it's not used that much anymore, but they called me like a metrosexual because I cared about like what I wore and that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
so, in retrospect, it's kind of funny that the box for men within the patriarchy is so narrow and small that even a guy who like cares about fashion, it's like, well, we've got to come up with a new name for that. We can't just call that a straight guy. We've got to come up with a new sexuality label because this man cares about how he smells and his grooming. So we have to come up with a metrosexual, right? Because really the box again is so small for what is acceptable. And that label felt like a pejorative to me when it was used. I didn't like the fact that people thought of me that way. And I actually joined the Marine Corps after college, and sometimes I reflect back on like why I did that because it did surprise everyone. I was trying to prove myself in some way within the system of the patriarchy. I knew that that would. I think I wanted to gain approval, certainly, and my dad was incredibly proud of me, and he still talks about it to this day. My son was a Marine and that sort of thing. But I think I also wanted to prove to myself that I could measure up to whatever these patriarchal standards were, even though that was so far outside of really who I was and how I was wired. And while I don't regret joining because I learned a lot about the world and myself, I can see that that was never for me. I was trying to bend myself to fit something, and I also really cut off parts of myself that I wasn't exploring. Instead, I thought I had to push myself to become more like this other thing. Um, and so all that said, all of that, I felt uncomfortable within it. But again, that was just reality. That was the way things were. And I thought the problem was myself, and I was supposed to conform myself to fit those standards. It really wasn't until I would say when I was probably about 5 years ago on my way out of the evangelical church, when I put in my resignation and and I was already deeply questioning a lot about that system. But part of the problem, it makes it really hard. Religion makes it extra hard to question the norms of the patriarchy because it sanctifies those as this isn't just the way the world is, this is the way God wants the world to be. And so it kind of adds an extra layer of you can't break free from this. It's not only the way the world is, it would be sinful to break free from this. Like God wants women to submit. God wants men to be the heads of their homes, et cetera, et cetera. This is the way God has ordered the world. And I had already begun to really wrestle with a lot of those things, but really coming out of that system where women couldn't even be pastors at the church where I was at, which is very common in evangelical churches. It's called complementarianism. So we taught in that system that men and women are equal but different. They have different roles, and they're equal in value before God. We would always emphasize that they're equal in value, but they have different roles in society. And what only started to occur to me when I was kind of breaking free from the system, when I could begin to think for myself about this, is that coincidentally, how strange that these different roles tend to give all the power and decision-making authority to men and not to women. And so these different roles actually do set up a different value in terms of what people are, especially in terms of power, in terms of who has the power, right? And so that became very obvious to me as I broke free from that system. So sometimes you have to get a little distance. And I would say what really made me see it as something that wasn't normative for everybody, it wasn't God's way. This was actually a man-made system, was stepping out of the institution that I was a part of that really made it hard to question that.
What made you step out of the system? Like, yeah, what sparked that?
So probably what sparked it for me was the rise of Donald Trump. And so that was in 2015 that I first started really questioning the thing that I was a part of. And it took really 5 years of wrestling and doing the kind of maybe I can do change from within the system of evangelicalism until 2020 was a bit of a breaking point for me where I realized that out of integrity, I needed to get out of this because I was censoring so much of myself in order to exist within it. And Trump, in some ways, I am grateful for the evangelical embrace of Trump because it made it really obvious. A lot of things, like even unfortunately, yeah, as a white man, I didn't see female subordination. I mean, I grew up in that, right? My dad is a fundamentalist pastor, so it was all I ever knew, and it didn't strike me as odd. Again, this was just the way the world was. This is the way the world was supposed to be. This is the way God wanted the world, and so that wasn't enough for me to say, well, this is suppressing women's rights. I need to break out of this. But Trump was this glaring. It was impossible to ignore the moral perversity of
Yeah.
Trump. And it was one of those moments where when a lot of the leaders were saying, no, this is good, he's going to fight for us, he's going to, do good Christian things. And it was like, obviously not. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? And so it was that moment where like the emperor had no clothes and they were trying to tell me that the emperor had clothes. And it was like, I can see him. He opens his mouth. Like, what do you mean? Like, didn't you like when people that I respected were defending him after the Access Hollywood tapes, something really broke in me. I was an evangelical pastor at the time, but I was like, no, 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 this is not. And at the time, though, I was saying, well, this is not who we are, right? Like, this is not who we are. And I wanted that to be true. And I think that journey from 2015 to 2020 was a journey of grief and a slow realization that this is who we are, unfortunately. And I need to accept that and break free from it so that I can begin to figure out who am I, because I was shaped by that system.
I was going to say, did that create a lot of cognitive dissonance for you? This feeling of like, oh my God, everything I thought was this way, and now there's this. Like, how did that
Yeah.
impact your mental health?
Yeah, I think, well, like it was a slow unfolding. And so I don't know that I had a major mental health crisis. It was cognitive dissonance for sure. It was um shocking for me, but there are voices within evangelicalism that are against Trump, and so I clung to those voices, and I tried to say, I guess I was doing some mental gymnastics and trying to say, like, yeah, again, this isn't who we are, and we need to push back against these forces that are anti-immigrant, the nationalism, the white nationalism, the racial resentment that seems to be fueling a lot of this. We have to push back against that. That's not the way of Jesus, and I still believe that.
Yeah.
But I think it was recognizing over those years that that resentment is what has fueled the evangelical movement in a lot of ways, and that I was never going to be able to change in all the ways that I needed to from within that movement. Again, like I could try to give women more power within that system, but the system was built on certain principles that disempowered women. So, yeah, like that was me as a pastor. During those years, I was doing things like making sure women did announcements, or we had female worship leaders, or leading prayer things, but they couldn't be pastors at the end of the day. So you could give all kinds of little roles and responsibilities to highlight or platform women, but the system was built to not give them decision-making authority. So they were never going to really have a seat at the table. Um, and it took me a little bit longer to get to the point of I need to really question the very foundations of some of this.
And so then when you started to question the foundations, not just of your family, but of the church and how you were raised, and then linking that to the patriarchy, what did you discover that you had suppressed within yourself, and what came about once you gave yourself permission to transform?
So when I quit, I put in my resignation at the end of 2020, and in 2021, my whole family moved a few hours away, which gave me some space, I think, to, I didn't want to run into my former parishioners at the grocery store and that sort of thing. I was in a small town, and now I'm in Raleigh, and with some distance, I really did feel like I could be myself and explore just who I wanted to be, even, on a very basic level, how I wanted to even show up visually. Like I got more tattoos. I got a hand tattoo, which I never would have gotten as a pastor. And I started wearing slightly more edgy, you might even call it flamboyant clothing. I don't particularly dress very flamboyantly compared to a lot of people, but for a straight man, probably, I'm on the edge of that. And I was holding back in that area when I was a pastor because I wanted to be relatable to the mostly again straight white men that were in our church. I didn't want to be seen as whatever, effeminate in any particular way,
And you had
because
been
that is
called
really the
a
death.
and you had been called a metrosexual, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
then
not for a long time by now. That word was kind of retired, but right, that was in my head, is I didn't want to be perceived that way,
yes,
and I thought
yes.
that perception would probably damage my ability to be a pastor to that congregation in the South. Right, I'm in an older white area of the South in North Carolina. Um, so I think I just started to visually show up differently. My friend group changed. I started to get a lot of gay friends. I found that I related a lot better to gay men in many ways than a lot of the straight guys. And a lot of that does have to do with the fact that the system wasn't built for them. And they are people who have always had to find their identity and existence outside of the system. And therefore, they have learned how to embrace parts of themselves and express parts of themselves that I think many men have a lot of fear of expressing. Um, and I began to recognize that many of the things that were mocked as weakness, that guys would call gay, for example,
Yeah.
uh, were just aspects of themselves that they were afraid of. Um, and so I began to see strength differently. Whereas I think in the sort of white male system, sort of evangelical heteronormative context, strength looked like dominance, masculinity, being shown in very particular rigid ways. But I began to, I think, see strength more in having the courage to be your authentic self. And I was seeing that more in women and queer people than in straight men. And I began to realize this isn't because straight men just don't have it in them and they don't have, because again, I'm a straight guy and I had these things in myself, but I began to see like, yeah, the world was suppressing these things in me. And because we lived in a world that was in many ways built for me, it was easier, okay, I think one of the metaphors that's been helpful for me to talk about this, there's this really bad evangelical pastor named Mark Driscoll. He was a mega church pastor and he grew a church really big, but there was a big scandal because he was very abusive and heavy-handed, as they often are. But one of the things he said was he was talking about Mars Hill was the name of his church, and he said, I don't care how many bodies stack up behind this bus, like we're moving forward. And he basically was saying, yeah, like there were people that just were excluded from the system, that were run over by the system. But for him, the institution is what mattered, and it kept moving forward. And in some ways, I think about that bus and the bodies behind the bus, and evangelicalism, white America, in many ways, was like a bus that had a seat for me on the bus. Like I was not one of the bodies run over by the bus, really. I was welcomed. I was like, you can be a pastor here. Like you can get authority. You can have a position. You can have a role. We're going to platform you. You're going to have a voice and a microphone. And so I didn't get off the bus because I got run over by it. I I recognized at some point that the bus that I'm on is running people over and I need to get off the bus. And
Yeah.
so but what I began to see though is that many of those people, like again, queer people, were run over early by the bus. They recognized, oh, this bus wasn't built for me. They threw me off a long time ago and they ran over me. But as a result, once they were able to pick themselves up, they could be themselves a little bit more. Now, never fully accepted by the system. But what I began to see was that in order to get that seat on the bus, I had to leave some things off the bus. I couldn't bring certain aspects of myself with me. And this has been discussed, for a long time in feminist literature, but men are taught from an early age to despise feminine attributes within themselves. And once I heard that vocalized by somebody, it was like so immediately true. Like it was just, and I don't remember the first time that I heard that kind of said out loud, but I was like, oh yeah, like absolutely. It's so obvious to me that boys are told not to throw like girls, not to run like girls, not to do anything like girls. Girls are not told not to throw like a boy. If anything, when a girl throws like a boy, it's like, oh, that's awesome. You can do it the good way,
Right.
There's a sense in which, even women, although certainly are excluded in many ways by the system, they are encouraged in ways to inhabit masculine attributes in ways that boys are not encouraged to inhabit feminine attributes. In evangelicalism, often when men would get together, or we had like men groups, we called them fight clubs, was the name of like when men would do like discipleship groups. And then when we would get all the men together, we called it Band of Brothers, which again is like the war. So it's all very war-y, all very battle, it's
Yeah.
very masculine coded in that way. And one of the things that I heard a lot of guys say that would kind of give advice for pastors on how to reach men, on how to disciple men, is that, women connect face to face. You can get a coffee date with a woman, and women will connect face to face, but men have to connect side by side. In other words, not really, they're not going to be looking at each other in the faces. You have to get them into a hobby. So that we were encouraged to like, get the guys to go fishing together, get them to go hunting together and stuff like that. And the thought was that in those activities that they would open up at some level, but there needs to be an activity which limits the vulnerability. And at the time when I was kind of learning that, that was just like a helpful tip for how to better reach men. But it was interesting that it was framed as like, this is just the way men are. Like, you just have to accept that that's the way men are, as opposed to like, hey, maybe like this is a problem and we should actually try to help lead men out of that. Like, it was never discussed within that framework. Like, hey, maybe it would be good if men could look at each other in the face.
Yeah.
Like, what about that? Like, what
Yeah.
if we actually helped our men have the courage to look at each other in the eyeballs, because women are doing that? What is it about men that they're not able to do that?
I love that. I love that. So this kind of goes into my next question, which is your content online and what you're doing in terms of challenging a lot of these narratives, which I think is so important. And what I also really like about you and what you're doing, as well as there are some other male influencers that I've come across on Instagram, but kind of make being feminist, make being human really cool. Right? Do you feel like you want to reach men who have been indoctrinated and are I mean, because the loneliness
Right.
epidemic, the rise in suicide, like the men are not doing well. And so I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if you feel, especially if you've felt mission driven before to help people as a pastor, like if that's shifted for you.
Yeah, it is tough to get men to listen to the kind of things that I say. If I wrote a book to men, for instance, and I've thought about this, my first book is very much about like deconstruction and evangelicalism, but I've thought about a future book potentially being like how to be a man that likes women, something like that. I don't know what the title would be, but the problem is the men wouldn't read that book like women would read that book probably, and wish that men would read that book. And it's hard to get men to listen to some of the stuff. I do. I'm a firm believer that you can't like argue people into change, that people change when they want to change. But what you can do is model the behavior you want to see. And so I'm trying to model behavior that men can imitate. I didn't have a lot of examples for
Right.
for it. And so I'm trying to maybe be the kind of example that 10 years ago would have been helpful to me, that could have been liberating to me if I would have seen that. Like, this is a vision for who I could be, that's different from what I'm saying I'm supposed to be by all these other voices. And so I think I can present that. And then ultimately I'm a dad, and so I'm struggling to even get my sons to like listen. People sometimes like, oh, your boys are so lucky to have your example. And what most people don't realize is parents provide a lot of safety for kids, but kids often look to their peers more than their parents for who they want to be. And
Yes.
so I don't know how jury's out on whether my sons are going to buy into the vision that I'm trying to present, or whether, because they're going to school, right? Like, and I already hear them say things where it's like, I didn't teach you that, but this is pervasive in the world. I don't
Yeah.
have to teach them any of that.
Right.
Where do you get it?
What are you seeing? Like what are you, I mean, not to out
Exactly.
your kids, but what
Uh-huh,
are you
uh-huh.
up against? I mean,
Well,
I
I
have a
mean,
10-year-old son,
I'm
so
up against
I'm
YouTube.
with you and Roblox. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have talked to them a lot about what they'll run into on YouTube to try to prepare them for that. But you know, my son, he'll often tell me like when he'll tell me about a YouTube video, it's like, and don't worry, it's not like a misogyny thing. And then he'll like explain what he saw. But like sometimes it will be quite subtle. Like he was watching a video the other day, he was telling me about. And we talk a lot, so that's good that I'm able to then like give some feedback. But he was telling me about a video that he really enjoyed and thought it was funny, where there was a guy who was like trying to flirt with girls and was struggling. So he had like a guy in his ear, basically like giving him advice. You know,
Like a
like a
Cyrano.
dating coach,
Yeah.
basically, I guess.
Yeah.
But sometimes that dating coach world, although I know that there are good ones, there's a lot of bad stuff that happens in that, especially for men. This idea it becomes like a game, or it doesn't become about connection. So the conversation I had with him, because it was something funny, right? He shared something, it was a joke from that, and he enjoyed the banter that was happening in the video. But then I was just like, hey, just remember, like, you don't need to say the perfect right thing. That's not like it's not like a girl is like a formula that you have to like, oh, if you don't say the right words, then you're not going to get a chance. We're people, we connect with people. So being yourself is always the best thing, because even if you said the right thing and then she liked you, she didn't really even like you. She liked the thing that the guy in your ear said to you, and that's not who you are. So that won't even make you feel good. What actually feels good is when people connect to the real you and you get to know the real them. So I did this whole speech, right? And he was just like, Dad, it's just a funny video. And I was like, all right, well, maybe it got in there. I don't know.
Have you talked to them about your journey as a boy and a man and the ways in which you felt limited and how you've changed?
I probably haven't gone that deep with them. And I might, as they get older, talk a little bit more about that. They're not, I don't know how interested they are but maybe they would be. I will say this,
Yeah.
I have talked to them about my journey towards affirming queer people. That has been something we've talked about at length, because um, my older son, I mean, he was 5, so he was pretty young when we left the evangelical church, but he was still old enough when we started to connect more with queer people and then go to an affirming church where there were queer people there. He at one point, I think when he was around 7 or so, he asked the question. He was like, did our other church like believe that it was okay to be gay? And I was like, no, actually, that's very observant. And so I kind of explained that journey that we were on. And so he has been, I think, proud of that. And he'll bring it up from time to time. Like when we talk even about other Christians, when he finds out somebody's Christian, that's one of the first questions he'll ask is, are they the kind of Christian that like likes gay people or not? Like he's trying to figure people out, like which category they fall
I
into.
love
And so
that.
he thinks a lot about that, because we do have like gay friends, and he's just aware of the fact that other people in our life don't believe that those people in our life should be married, should have rights, should be able to have a family in that way. And
Right.
so he especially my older son has kind of taken that like a little bit personally in some way. And so I've talked to him about that journey. And so he knows that I used to be a pastor in that world. And he has said even things like, I can't believe that you used to believe that and stuff like that.
But
Which,
did you ever believe it or you just kind of
yeah,
were
I mean, I grew up believing it. And so it was told to me from a very young age. I remember even, I was talking about this recently, that what disgust is socialized. And I was reacting to a video because I saw a comedian do a video where there were like two guys kissing, and he had this whole big, like, ew, oh, God, don't show me that. Like he had this big disgust reaction, right? And so I was just commenting on that, that well, that's really harmful, first of all. And he was acting like that was just natural. Like, of course, as a straight person, of course that would gross me out, right? That was kind of his perception. And what I was just saying was, well, I know that that's not true because I grew up being grossed out by that because I was told that it was gross. That was how I was socialized. And I remember if I saw two men kiss, I would have had that same reaction as a child, as a young person. And my dad, I mean, that was confirmed by the adults in my life. If like something gay happened on TV, my dad would turn the TV off. He would say like this is disgusting and that sort of thing.
wow.
And Yet as an adult, having now friends in that world, being exposed to it, that doesn't disgust me anymore. If I see two men kiss, I don't think that it's gross. I think, oh, that's so cute, in the same way that I'm so happy. I love love wherever it is. I love love. And
Yeah.
my kids who didn't grow up with the adults in their life confirming that disgust narrative, they don't find that gross. So they weren't socialized to believe that that was gross. Um, and so, yeah, I grew up being socialized a particular way, and I had to break free from some of that programming, and it makes me happy that my kids haven't received that.
You were saying in your video that you're a single dad. What happened there? What's the story there? And how does that influence your parenting?
So I'm divorced.
Right.
I have a co-parent. I have 50% custody, and so I use single dad because I'm alone when I'm parenting. But I do have a co-parent who has them for half of the time, but I don't have a partner in the home with me parenting. So sometimes there's some confusion about that term. People use it differently. Um, there are parents obviously who have sole custody, and it's just them. And so sometimes they don't like it when other people use the term single parent. However, I've kind of looked into it, and that is like when you're parenting alone without a partner, that term applies. And I found it helpful because um, I will say that it has really changed the way that I approach parenting. I wasn't really acquainted with ideas like the mental load or, yeah, things like that were not discussed. And I'm sure that I had a lot of those socialized issues in our marriage, especially, our marriage was shaped by the conservative Christian world that we came up in, which said, man's the head of the household, wives were supposed to be submissive. That being said, I don't feel like those were our dynamics necessarily. I wasn't like super heavy-handed with it, but that was the water that we swam in, and kind of the understanding of how the relationships were supposed to be ordered. And so I'm sure that some of that creeped into the way that we related with each other a lot in a lot of unhealthy ways. And sometimes it's hard to like kind of go back and like be like, well, I wonder what patterns, were there. But after our deconstruction, when we stepped away from the church, we got separated about a year after that, which was really scary for me. I never thought that I would ever be parenting alone. I mean, I just always thought that it would always look this particular way. Um, and I certainly never thought I'd be, yeah, like be a single dad and have my kids by myself. I just wasn't prepared for it. And at first, I was really overwhelmed and it was really hard. But what I realized as I had to step into a lot of the roles that I probably was just not really involved in, I think I probably outsourced a lot of the connection to my kids to my wife when we were married. And I don't think I realized the extent to which I was doing that until I was the only parent in the home with them when I had them. And yeah, I really had to press into those relationships in a new way. And so I do feel like I'm closer to my boys now than I was when I was married. And not because, yeah, getting divorced will automatically help you do that or being single parent. If anything, I mean, right now, I wish I had a partner a lot of times because sometimes it's like if you're cooking and cleaning, it's hard to also take time to sit down and get on their level and do connection work, right?
Yes.
Because you are literally doing everything else. And so
Yeah.
that can be really, really draining. But there's also nobody to kind of outsource that to. And I think that as guys, we are socialized to let our wives do a lot of that nurturing. Um, and I'm sure she's still probably better at it than me in a lot of different ways. And I'm sure she's also still carrying mental load that I'm not carrying, even though we each have 50% custody. I try when something comes to light that like, oh, I didn't even know about that. Like, yeah, that happens, right? There's a lot of tropes about this. Like even after divorce, the wives carrying things like knowing the teachers' names or doing all the contact with teachers or different things like that. And I try to be engaged, but I'm sure that there's areas and when one comes to light, like, oh wow, I didn't even know that I was supposed to be on that email list. I try to get on it and I try to then step up. But I also am just I think being self-aware of the fact that that will be probably always a thing because of the ways that we were both socialized. Being self-aware is like the best you can do, and then to try to just own it when one of those things comes up and try to step up and be better in that way. um, but as so yeah, I think that's one thing that's changed as a single dad. I think I became very aware of some of those mental load issues that she was probably carrying in the marriage that only became really apparent to me when I was single parenting with my boys. And Yeah, it's been really hard, and I'm really bad at it a lot of times. I don't know, I don't claim to be an expert. I don't know that there is a way to be good at it at times, you know. Like
Yeah,
what we
it's
ask of parents under capitalism, especially single parents, it's like a impossible scenario, I think.
yeah.
It can feel a little impossible, but all that said, I am proud of the way that I've grown, and I feel confident that my relationship with my boys will be better as adults even than it would have been if I was on the trajectory that I was on before. All the real changes I think that matter most, and that's why even, you know, from a spirituality perspective, while many things have shifted for me, Jesus's sort of pattern of death and then resurrection as a spiritual paradigm still really works for me because I see that in my own life. I see my divorce as a kind of a death, but I see a lot of resurrection on the other side of that. And the same thing with my deconstruction. That in many ways my life is a lot harder now than it was before when I was an evangelical pastor and married and had all the kind of things that I was supposed to have. Um, I feel yeah, it's a lot harder in certain ways, but at the same time, I feel a lot freer and I feel more authentic to who I am, and I feel like I'm walking in greater levels of integrity.
I love that so much. That's amazing. So I'd like to ask, I usually ask everyone at the end of my interviews, what advice you'd give to parents. Doesn't necessarily have to be to dads, but it sounds like you're well positioned to give advice to dads of boys because those are the people who watch these
Yeah.
interviews.
I think that boys do need to hear from their dads about misogyny, not just their moms. Um, I I think it is. I mean, not with kids. Probably when they're a little older to explain feminism. I think it could be really powerful if it was dads explaining why boys should be feminists. Like I just I don't know why that's not more common. But the reality is, in the same way that like anti-blackness is not black people's problem to solve. They didn't create white supremacy. You know, that's white people. We have to take that. White people have to take that more seriously, not
Yeah.
wait for black people to take it more seriously. Queer phobia is not queer problems. They didn't structure a world to marginalize them. That's straight people that have to take that seriously. And in the same way, you know, misogyny that's a man problem. That's us. That's our issue. So why are women talking about it all the time when that's a man issue? And so I think we need to talk about it. That's our issue. And so I do think that it would mean a lot for men, fathers to explain to their boys just a little bit about the way that the world is structured and give them eyes to see. Because once you know the pattern, you're going to see the pattern everywhere. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at the world and see that straight white men control just about everything and have all the power. It's most of the billionaires are straight white men.
Yeah.
All of our presidents, except for one, was a straight white man, and they've all been men. That's just, I mean, but why are men better at like leading things than women? Are men better at organizing society than women? They haven't been particularly successful actually at all. Like but yet that's the way the world is. And again, that's not reality. That's the system. And that's a tough thing to explain to a kid because they're trying to fit into reality as it is, you know? And so a lot of the time they're just trying to fit into the system. But I think when dads give them the language to notice some of these patterns in the world, like the patriarchy and misogyny, yeah, I just don't think they should leave it to the moms to explain why it's important. So for me, I think boys should be feminists. And I talk about this a lot because I think feminism is very clearly, it's not about women being better than men. It's about men and women being equal. And the reason feminism is necessary is because the patriarchy exists, that we live in a system that does offer benefits and privileges to men that are not offered to women. And so that's all feminism is to say we shouldn't live in a society like that. We should treat people equally. People should have equal rights. And I think just simply a dad explaining that could be really, really powerful to sons. And then letting them know what they're going to probably run into online. Because more and more our kids are living their lives online. And that's not going to change. So we can battle against it. We can try to reduce screen time. We can try to like hold off on social media until 16, like the experts say. We can do all those things. But we can't change the world that it is. This is the world that they're entering. They're going to be living their lives online. And if you're a boy online, the algorithm is going to feed you misogyny. You will, my son, I didn't have to tell my son who Andrew Tate was.
Right.
He learned about it. His friends talk about him. Now they're usually making fun of him. They're not necessarily all fans of him, but he has become a mainstream figure. So these ideas are mainstream and they're being exposed at a young age to some of the stuff. And so they need even the fact that like he's watching videos that aren't necessarily misogynistic, but he knows that that could be there. So when he talks to him about it, he'll say, that that's not in there. I think that that's a win. That's a parenting win on my
It
part.
is. It
And
is. It's amazing.
I do think it's a simple, I mean, no, it's not simple, but I do think that dads should be having if you haven't had a conversation with your son about misogyny, today's the day.